The studio lights were warm, the smiles easy, until they weren't. Blake Shelton leaned back in his chair on Today with Jenna and Friends, boots crossed at the ankle, trading the kind of easy humor that had made him a daytime favorite. He teased the band, cracked a joke about his coffee being stronger than the questions, and waved to the crowd like he owned the place. Laughter rolled through the studio, and for a while it felt like another polished, friendly segment destined to clip cleanly for social media. Then the conversation drifted, softly at first, toward the edges. Jenna, still smiling, mentioned his recent career moves, the projects he'd turned down, the ones he'd embraced. Blake shrugged it off with a grin, talking about timing, about wanting to breathe a little after years of non-stop work. The audience nodded along. It was relatable, comfortable, but comfort has a way of thinning when you tug at it. A follow-up question came, framed as curiosity but sharpened by implication. It hinted at rumors, at pressure from networks, at whether Blake's choices were really his own. The smile on his face didn't vanish, it stalled, like a truck hitting a sudden incline. He chuckled once, low and quick, and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, trying to meet it head-on without letting it land too hard. "I don't really get into the rumor mill," he said lightly. "That stuff grows legs on its own." The crowd laughed, relieved. Jenna nodded, moving as if to pivot. But another voice chimed in, friendly but persistent, asking if he felt boxed in by expectations, by being the easygoing guy, the coach, the country star who never rocked the boat. The words floated there, polite and pointed. Blake's fingers drummed once on the armrest. A small thing, most people wouldn't have noticed. The cameras did. "I don't feel boxed in," he replied. "I feel lucky. It should have been enough." But daytime television thrives on tension dressed as insight, and the moment wasn't allowed to settle. The question was rephrased, then reframed, about authenticity, about whether he worried fans might see a different version of him than the one he actually was. The kind of question that sounds thoughtful and lands heavy. Blake inhaled, longer this time. His eyes flicked briefly toward the band, then back to the hosts. He smiled again, but it didn't reach all the way up. "I think folks see what I choose to show," he said. "Same as anybody else." The audience shifted, sensing the change. Applause rippled but didn't swell. Somewhere off camera, a producer gestured subtly, the universal sign to keep it moving. But the exchange had already tightened into something else, an invisible cord pulled just a bit too far. Jenna laughed softly, trying to smooth the moment. She complimented his honesty, pivoted toward his music, asked about the stories behind the songs. Blake relaxed a fraction, shoulders lowering, voice warming as he talked about writing late at night, about melodies that came easy and lyrics that didn't. The crowd leaned back in, grateful for familiar ground. And then, another nudge. It came wrapped in praise. How admired he was for speaking his mind, how fans loved his bluntness. Then the turn. Whether he ever regretted being too honest on camera. Whether that bluntness had ever cost him something he cared about. Blake's smile froze. He laughed, but it sounded thinner, like it had traveled a longer distance to get out. "I think honesty costs everybody something at some point," he said. "That's not special to me." The host nodded, but pressed, just a little. Was there a moment he wished he'd walked away instead of answering? A moment he wished he'd kept quiet? The irony hung there, unnoticed or unacknowledged. Blake shifted in his chair. He glanced at the floor, then back. Up, meeting the camera with a look that felt less like performance and more like decision. "I don't usually play the what-if game," he said. "I try to live with what I say." A murmur moved through the crowd. It wasn't disapproval, more like recognition. The easy banter of the opening minutes felt far away now, replaced by the careful listening that comes when something real threatens to surface. The host smiled again, thanked him for being open, and finally moved on. But the air had changed. Even as they joked about tour buses and bad diner coffee, Blake's laughter came a beat late, his posture more upright, guarded. He answered, but shorter. Smiles flashed, but they didn't linger. Between questions, he took a sip of water and set the cup down with deliberate care. The cameras caught the tension in the small things, the way he nodded instead of interrupting, the way his eyes tracked the conversation rather than floating through it. He wasn't angry, not yet, but he was alert, like someone who'd felt a line brush their ankle in deep water. The segment pushed on. The audience clapped on cue. The band played a quick sting. Jenna thanked him for joining, teasing what was coming up next. Blake smiled, stood halfway as if ready to wave and sit back down. Then a final comment slipped in, offhand, almost playful, about how viewers loved seeing the real Blake, especially when things got uncomfortable. The word uncomfortable echoed louder than intended. Blake paused. He was standing now, fully upright, hands resting on the chair. He looked out at the audience, at the lights, at the faces waiting for the next beat. For a split second, the old grin flickered back, muscle memory kicking in. But something in his eyes had shifted. "Y'all," he said, voice calm but firm, "I came here to talk music and have a good time." The studio went quiet, not silent, but hushed in that way that tells you something unscripted has entered the room. Blake nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. He thanked the crowd, sincerely, warmly, but the decision had already settled in his posture. The moment hovered there, unresolved, the walk-off not yet complete but suddenly inevitable. Blake took a step back from the chair, the applause coming in uneven bursts, confused rather than celebratory. The hosts exchanged quick glances, professional smiles locked in place, but the rhythm of the show had slipped off its rails. Jenna stood too, laughing lightly, hands raised in a calming gesture. "Hey, no worries," she said. "We're all good here." Blake nodded, appreciative, but his gaze stayed steady. "I know," he replied. "And I appreciate the invite. I really do." His voice wasn't raised. That was the unsettling part. It carried clearly, evenly, without the heat people expected when something went wrong on live television. He turned slightly toward the audience. "Y'all have been great. Thank you for being here this morning." That earned real applause, stronger now, more instinctive. People sensed a line being crossed and respected the way he was stepping back from it. Blake gave a small smile, the familiar one, and then looked back at the hosts. "I'm gonna take off," he said simply. "Much love." For half a second, no one moved. The band didn't play. The cameras hesitated, unsure whether to follow or cut wide. Then Blake stepped forward, past the edge of the set, his boots heavy against the studio floor. A producer hurried in from the side, murmuring something meant only for him. Blake listened, nodded once, and kept walking. The screen cut to a wide shot. Jenna clapped lightly, laughing again, steering the moment back toward control. "Well," she said, breathy but composed, "that was unexpected. We'll be right back." The music finally kicked in. Backstage, the air felt cooler, quieter. Blake exhaled for the first time since standing up, running a hand over the brim of his cap. A staffer offered water. He took it, drank deeply, and leaned against the wall like someone grounding themselves after a sudden stop. "No hard feelings," he said to no one in particular. "Just not my thing." Within minutes, phones were buzzing. Assistants whispered. Someone mentioned social media lighting up already. Clips were being pulled, captions drafted, opinions formed in real time. Blake didn't check his phone. He didn't need to. He knew how these moments traveled, how they stretched, bent, and came back altered. Out on the street, a small cluster of fans had gathered, alerted by the sudden movement. Blake waved as he passed, stopping for a few quick photos. He thanked them again, voice warm, as if nothing unusual had happened. To them, it hadn't. It was just Blake being Blake, direct, polite, and done. Inside the studio, the show pushed forward. The host smiled through the next segment, but the energy never fully recovered. During a commercial break, producers huddled, replaying the exchange on monitors, dissecting tone and timing. No one pointed fingers out loud. There was no need. Everyone knew the delicate dance of live TV, and how easy it was to misstep. By the time Blake's SUV merged into traffic, the narrative was already splitting into camps. Some praised him for setting boundaries, for refusing to be boxed into a version of himself that existed only for clicks. Others questioned whether he'd overreacted, whether walking off had made a bigger statement than he intended. The debate churned, fed by looping footage and bold headlines. Blake arrived back at his hotel and headed straight upstairs. He kicked off his boots, dropped onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling. The quiet felt earned. He thought about the question, the word uncomfortable, and how it had landed not as curiosity, but as a challenge. He didn't regret standing up. He regretted that it had come to that at all. His phone finally buzzed. A text from a friend. Saw it. "You good?" Blake smiled, typed back, "All good. Coffee later." Elsewhere, statements were being drafted. A spokesperson emphasized mutual respect, a misunderstanding, no ill will. The show's social accounts posted a cheerful clip from earlier in the interview, careful framing doing its best to soften the edge. Comment sections filled faster than they could be moderated. By afternoon, the story had evolved again. Clips surfaced of Blake laughing with fans outside the studio. A longer angle showed his calm tone, the lack of theatrics. The word, walk off, began sharing space with boundary and choice. The heat cooled, replaced by analysis. That evening, Blake sat with a guitar across his lap, fingers wandering into a familiar progression. He didn't write about the show. He wrote about mornings on the road, about knowing when to stay and when to go. The song came easy. He hummed, then laughed quietly at himself. Across town, the hosts wrapped their day, exhausted. Jenna paused before leaving, glancing back at the empty set. Live TV was like that, bright, fast, and unforgiving. She hoped Blake knew there was no malice in it, just momentum. The next morning, headlines softened. Interviews followed, not with Blake, but about him. Commentators debated the nature of authenticity, the line between access and intrusion. Fans shared stories of concerts where he'd stopped mid-song to talk, to listen, to be present on his own terms. When Blake finally spoke, briefly, in a radio interview days later, he kept it simple. "Everybody's doing their job," he said. "I just know when something doesn't feel right for me." The moment passed, as moments do. But it left a faint outline, a reminder that even in the brightest studios, lines exist, and sometimes the most powerful move isn't to argue, but to stand up, say thanks, and walk away.